సార్ కూర్చోండి. Good morning everybody. Today's class is atypical ribs. Yesterday you have already heard about typical ribs. Now atypical ribs. Before that we see how the ribs are there. The ribs are elongated curved flat bones and form largest part of the thoracic case. 12 pairs of ribs are there. All ribs articulate posteriorly with the thoracic vertebra and anteriorly all ribs except the last two, which are floating ribs, join the sternum through their respective costal cartilages either directly or indirectly. A rib and its costal cartilage form a costal arch. The upper 7 ribs are called true ribs. The lower 5 ribs are false ribs. Out of these, 8 to 10 ribs are known as the vertebrochondral. So whereas the upper 7 ribs which join the sternum directly, we are calling them as vertebrosternal. And the last two, 11th and 12th ribs, we are calling as vertebral ribs because they are not joining the sternum and they are floating. The 3rd to 9th ribs form typical ribs as they bear common features and individual identification is not possible. So here we are showing the ribs here. The upper ribs 1 to 7. See here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These ribs are joining directly the sternum. So they are vertebrosternal. So posteriorly they are starting from the vertebral column, thoracic vertebrae, and anteriorly they are joining the sternum. So these are called vertebrosternal. They are true ribs. Whereas the 8th, 9th, 10th, these 3 ribs are joining indirectly through their costal cartilage the sternum. So these are called false ribs. And then the 11th and 12th ribs are floating ribs. They are not at all joining the sternum. Same one. And the back side also we are showing the same thing. Here the floating ribs are very clearly shown. And here we are seeing the joint between the transverse process of the vertebra and the tubercle of the concerned rib. 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. And then the ribs increase in size from 1st to 7th rib and then decrease in size. So the 7th rib is the longest rib. All ribs are oblique and sloping downwards and forwards. The obliquity is essential for thoracic type of respiration. See here we are showing the ribs are oblique, forward and downwards. See, forward and downwards. That means the anterior end of the rib is far lower than the posterior end. This is the first rib we are exemplifying. See, the posterior end is at this level, whereas the anterior end is far lower than that. Sloping downwards, forward. This is essential for the thoracic type of respiration. This is absent in children, where we are having abdominal type of respiration. The 1st, 2nd, 10th, 11th and 12th ribs are atypical. They can be identified by special features. So we are having 5 of all ribs and is shortest of the true ribs. So the first rib is strongest, flattest and most curved of all the ribs, and it is shortest of the true ribs. When we say it is shortest of not all ribs but true ribs, because the 12th rib is shorter than this first rib. So they are false ribs. So we are telling it as shortest of the true ribs. The sternal end meets the widest part of the mandibulosterni through its cartilage at the first chondrosternal joint, which is primarily cartilages and replaced by bone usually after 25 years. So this first rib joins the mandibulosterni at a cartilageous joint, which will be replaced later by 25 years by bone. Hence the first rib does not usually move in quiet respiration. The head is small and bears a circular articular facet to articulate fully with the body of the first thoracic vertebra. So the head of the first rib is small and bears a circular articular facet to articulate fully with the body of the first thoracic vertebra. So here we are showing the first rib, which is almost the superior aspect we are showing. Here it is having a head, a neck, a tubercle, a shaft. So the shaft, the head is articulating with the first thoracic vertebrae, that is on the posterior aspect. This is on the anterior aspect, which is articulating with the costal cartilage, which is going to articulate with the manubrium sterni. And now we are having this first rib is having a superior surface, an inferior surface, an inner border and outer border. Now we are showing the superior surface. Superior surface is having two depressions with a tubercle in the middle. See, two depressions with a tubercle in the middle. We are calling it as the scalenate tubercle, which is giving attachment to the anterior scalenate muscle. Now these depressions, the anterior one, that is towards the costal cartilage, is accommodating the vein, and this one, the posterior one, is accommodating the artery, subclavian vein and subclavian artery. And then we are having a rough surface towards the anterior part of this bone, wherein we are having costocoracoid ligament attachment as well as the subclavius muscle attachment. And posterior to the depression of the subclavian artery, we are having an elevation which is giving attachment to the upper part of the first digitation of the serratus anterior, and between this and the tubercle we are having the attachment of the scalus medius. And of course there is a tubercle which is having a articular facet as well as a rough surface. This articular facet is articulating with the the transverse process of the first rib. Of course head is there, neck is there. Now this is the picture of the first rib, which will be complete if in exams by any chance you are asked a question on first rib, short notes mostly, 4 marks question. If you write this picture completely with all the parts, that is full. So now be careful, read, follow it. So here we are showing the head, the neck and the tubercle, the shaft. The head is articulating with the first thoracic vertebrae, and the neck is having the costo-transverse ligament towards its outer aspect, whereas the inner border of this neck is traversed from, is related to medial to lateral. It is the sympathetic trunk, then the superior intercostal vein, superior intercostal artery and the T1 nerve. That is the first thoracic nerve root. Then we are having the tubercle, which is getting articulation with the transverse process of the first thoracic vertebrae, and there is a lateral costo-transverse ligament is there, and then behind that we are having the attachment of scalus medius, and at the same time the outer border is giving attachments to external intercostal and internal intercostal muscles. And then we are having the attachment of the serratus anterior muscle behind the depression for the subclavian artery, and of course we are showing the depression of the subclavian artery posteriorly and subclavian vein anteriorly. In between we are having the scalenate tubercle, which giving attachment to the anterior scalus muscle, and then more anteriorly we are having costocoracoid ligament and subclavius muscle. So now the description. The neck is round and extended posterior laterally with an upward inclination. And then to the tubercle, like this, upward ingression to the tubercle of the rib. The anterior surface of neck is crossed mediolaterally beneath the pleura. Anterior surface of neck is crossed mediolaterally beneath the pleura by sympathetic trunk, first posterior intercostal vein, superior intercostal artery, the ascending branch of the ventral ramps of the first thoracic nerve. The tubercle is broad and prominent, projects backwards, upwards and medially. This articulates with the by its medial oval facet with the transverse process of the medial oval facet with the transverse process of the first thoracic vertebra. This one, medial oval facet. The side of the first rib is determined by placing the rib flat on the surface when both head and sternal end touch the surface. Otherwise also we can say this is the superior aspect because of the two depressions of the subclavian artery, subclavian vein and artery, and then inferior surface is clean, and we are having this is the posterior end, this is the anterior end, this is the lateral side, this is the middle side, so this is almost the left side. Or if you put it on the table like this, if both ends reach the surface, it is the lateral part of the rib shows this side. This is the left side. The shaft is flat and presents upper and lower surfaces, outer and inner borders, upper and lower surfaces, outer and inner borders. Upper surface is crossed by two shallow oblique grooves separated by a faint ridge with a small projection scalenate tubercle close to the inner border. See, here is the projection here, and then which receives the attachment of scalenus anterior. The anterior groove lodges the subclavian vein, the posterior groove lodges the subclavian artery, and usually lower trunk of the brachial plexus behind the artery. The area in front of the subclavian vein is rough and gives attachment to the costoclavicular ligament and subclavius muscle. So here we are shown in the figure the costoclavicular ligament and subclavius muscle. The area between the arterial groove and the tubercle, receives the attachment of the scalenus medius. This part, arterial groove and the tubercle receives the attachment of the scalenus medius. The upper border is convex and thick in the posterior part and gives attachment to the upper part of the first digitation of the serratus anterior behind the groove for the subclavian artery. The inner border is concave and thin and gives attachment to the suprapleural membrane or Simpson's fascia. Now, the lower surface is smooth and does not present the costal groove. Costal groove is present in all the typical vertebra and it is absent here in the first one. Close to and along the outer border, it provides attachment to the intercostalis externus and intimus muscles. Intercostalis intimus is absent in the first rib. Rest of the lower surface is covered by the costal pleura and endothoracic fascia. The first intercostal vessels and nerves pass along this surface between the intercostalis intimus muscle and the costal pleura with arrangement of the nerve, artery, vein from above downwards. And usually in other intercostal spaces it is vein, artery and nerve, vein. Whereas here in the first intercostal space it is different, that is the nerve, artery and vein. Artery is however in the center and the nerve and vein are changing their positions. So now we go for the second rib. In the second rib we are having, the second rib is not as strong as the first rib or as wide as the first rib, and it is double the size of the first rib. It is also having a head, neck and the shaft. Right? So this is having the various attachments. Of course, there is a scalenate tubercle here, and for the attachment of the scalenus anterior muscle, serratus anterior. Okay, I will go for it. See, second rib, it is similar to the first rib but thinner and twice the length of the first rib. It also has a head, neck and shaft. The external surface is convex, facing upward and laterally, and presents a prominent tuberosity near the middle of the shaft. This tuberosity gives attachment to the lower part of the first degeneration of the first degeneration and entire second degeneration of the serratus anterior. Now a narrow ridge extends backwards from this muscular impression to the tubercle of the rib. So this is the ridge. This ridge gives attachment to the scalenus posterior and serratus posterior superior. This ridge gives attachment to the scalenus posterior and serratus posterior superior. Now attachment of the intercostal muscles and membranes seen in the inner aspect of the superior surface. Attachment of the superior costo-transverse ligament is present in the neck. The attachment of lateral costo-transverse ligament is seen at the tubercle. In front of the tubercle, the attachment of levator costae, here the levator costae is seen. A faint costal groove is seen in the inferior surface. This one, a faint costal groove is seen in the inferior surface. 10th rib. It presents a single facet on its head to articulate fully with the body of the 10th thoracic vertebra. The other things are as usual. 11th rib possesses a single large facet on its head. It has no neck, tubercle, and shaft presents a slight angle and shallow costal groove. So the 11th rib is having a single large facet on its head. It has no neck or tubercle. The shaft presents a slight angle and a shallow costal groove. Shaft is having a slight angle and shallow costal groove. The muscles that attach to the 11th rib are serratus posterior inferior, iliocostalis thoracis, iliocostalis lumborum, latissimus dorsi, external oblique and transverse abdominis. Both 11th and 12th ribs are floating ribs and slope downwards and forwards, laterally slope, downwards, forwards and laterally. The pointed tip are fitted with cartilage. The 12th rib is shorter than the 11th. It presents a single facet on its head for articulation with the body of the 12th thoracic vertebra. The 12th rib is shorter than the 11th. It presents a single facet on its head for articulation with the body of the 12th thoracic vertebra. It has no neck, no tubercle, no angle and no costal groove. So all the characteristic features of the typical vertebra, typical rib are not there. So it has no neck, no tubercle, no angle and no costal groove. The 12th rib presents anterior and posterior surfaces and upper and lower borders. The anterior surface is concave and faces slightly upwards. Numerous muscles and ligaments are attached to the 12th rib. The anterior surface of 12th rib towards its upper border gives attachment to the costo-transverse ligament near the head. Lateral to this costo-transverse ligament, the internal intercostal muscle is attached. Then at the tip, the diaphragm is attached. Near its lower border, it gives attachment to the quadratus lumborum near its head. The posterior surface of 12th rib near its upper border gives attachment to the levator costae near its head, external intercostal muscle in the middle and latissimus dorsi toward the tip. Then on its lower border, erector spinae near the head, serratus posterior inferior in the middle and external oblique toward the tip. So here we are showing the figures. The 12th rib, this is the anterior aspect in this one and this is the posterior aspect. In the anterior aspect we are having the attachment of the costo-transverse ligament near the head, and then we are having the attachment of the internal intercostalis muscle to the anterior surface, and then we are having the attachment of the diaphragm, and these are all towards the upper border. Towards the lower border we are having the attachment of the quadratus lumborum. Then on the posterior aspect, we are having the attachment of the levator costae. Excuse me. So on the posterior aspect, we are having the attachment of the costotransversal ligament near the head. Now here in the posterior aspect, no. So we are having here the attachment of the levator costae near the head in the posterior aspect on the superior part, and then behind the lateral to that we are having the attachment of the external intercostal muscle, say in the middle of the anterior aspect we are having internal intercostalis, whereas in the middle of the posterior aspect we are having external intercostalis muscle, and towards the tip we are having the attachment of the latissimus dorsi. There towards the tip we are having the attachment of the diaphragm. Now on the inferior aspect we are having the attachment of the erector spinae towards the head, and then we are having the attachment of the serratus posterior inferior, and then we are having the attachment of the external oblique. So external oblique, serratus posterior inferior, and erector spinae. These are the three muscles attached to the lower border of the 12th rib. Ossification of the ribs. A typical rib is ossified from one primary center for the shaft, which appears near the posterior angle at the second month of the intrauterine life. A typical rib ossifies from one primary center for the shaft and appears near the posterior angle in the second month of intrauterine life. Three secondary centers, one for head, one for each for the articular and non-articular part of the tubercle. So for the shaft, primary center, and for the head and for the tubercle, head 1 and tubercle 2 secondary centers. One for articular part and one for the non-articular part of the tubercle. They appear at the puberty and fuse with the rest of the bone after the 20 years. This is for all except first and last two ribs. The first rib is ossified from one primary center for the shaft and two secondary centers for the head and tubercle. The last rib ossifies by one primary center for the shaft and one secondary center for the head. Applied aspect. Fracture of the ribs by direct injury. Broken ends of the rib often goes inward, causing tear in the pleura and produces pneumothorax or hemothorax. So, a direct injury will break the ribs such that the ends, the broken ends, cause a tear in the pleura or lung, producing pneumothorax or hemothorax. The condition is very painful. Middle ribs are most commonly fractured. This condition is very painful, either pneumothorax or hemothorax, and the middle ribs are most commonly fractured. In indirect violence, by compression of the ribs, commonly fracture close to their angle and broken ends slide outwards. So in indirect violence, the broken ends come outwards such that there is no injury to the pleura or the lung. Now, if several ribs are fractured in two or more places, segments of chest wall are drawn inward during inspiration and outward in expiration. Such paradoxical movement is called flail chest, which often causes severe dyspnea. So here I have to say, during inspiration, actually the chest moves outward, and during expiration, just moves inwards. But in case of this flail chest, that means when several ribs are fractured at more than two or more places, what is happening is a part of this chest wall is disconnected from the other ribs. So it is moving paradoxically, that is moving inward with inspiration and outward with expiration instead of outward with inspiration and inward with expiration when intact. So this is what we are calling as flail chest. Compression of chest against the steering wheel produces stow-in chest ventilation of both lungs are in the stow-in chest. That means a part of the chest is compressed. So we call it as stow-in chest, wherein the ventilation of both lungs are affected. The other clinical importance is thoracotomy, which we need for any operations on the heart, and subariosteal resection of the ribs for autogenous boost. So when you want to have a graft somewhere for a broken bone or something like that, we have to get this rib, subariosteal resection of the rib, which is useful for autograft. So that ends your class. Thank you.
Insensitive to the actions of insulin. How much of insulin the person may have, the problem is the receptors for insulin become desensitized, and therefore
somebody wants to see the figures. I told you this one is the important figure. The first rib, again I am telling, first rib, this figure is drawn. You can say the head, neck, tubercle, then the shaft. In the head we are having an articular facet which is articulating complete circular articular facet which is completely articulating with the side of the first thoracic vertebra, and then there is a tubercle which is having a articular facet and a non-articular part. This articular facet is articulating with the transverse process of the first thoracic vertebra, and then the neck. The neck is there. It is anteriorly related to the sympathetic trunk, superior intercostal vein, superior intercostal artery, and the first thoracic nerve. And then we are having the shaft, which is having a superior surface and inferior surface, and in the superior surface we are having two grooves which are crossing it, and these grooves anteriorly it is occupied by the subclavian artery, and the posterior groove is occupied by the anterior groove is occupied by the subclavian vein, posterior groove is occupied by the subclavian artery, and of course the lower trunk is also there, part of the lower trunk is also there, and then the area between this artery and the tubercle we are having insertion of the scalenus medius. Here in between the grooves for the artery and vein we are having the sertus anterior muscle, insertion of the sertus anterior muscle, and of course we are having the subclavius muscle here and costocaudal ligament. These are the things, if you repeat, that will be more than sufficient for the first rib. And of course if you want, right, the ossification of the first rib. The first rib is ossified by a primary center for the shaft and a secondary center, one for the head and two for the tubercle. One is the articular part and one is the non-articular part. That is more than sufficient.
Blood sugar is high. When the blood sugar is high, then the blood sugar is not able to enter into the cell because the receptors are insensitive. Therefore, a higher dose of insulin may be required to overcome the insulin resistance. And therefore, the sulfonylurea is never negated. Sulfonylurea enter into the pancreatic beta cell and do what actually sugar does. Sugar actually stimulates the production of ATP. But sulfonylurea don't have to do that. Sulfonylurea don't have to increase the ATP production. Sulfonylurea generally activate the potassium.